And we all make mistakes. Like I have made some doozies and some ones that are not so big, but we've all made some mistakes. I've been booked twice for speeding in my driving career. I don't know how that compares to with you guys. Once I got booked, I remember them distinctly. Very disappointed in myself. I was riding my motorcycle, and we were going to Bible study of all the places. And we were going in Brisbane along, I think it was Sherwood Road, completely dark. Like there was nothing except the industrial estate along the part that we were going. And I was riding along, and we were doing just over 70 k's an hour in the 60 zone, and I saw two motorbikes up in the distance, and I backed off. And I thought, this might be cops. I backed off. Unfortunately, I backed off too late, and I got done for 77 in a 60 zone. Another time, I was driving my car. That's nothing compared to some of the speeding I've done, but I was driving in my car. I was going down to Brisbane, and I was driving along Murphy's Creek Road, and I was daydreaming. And while I was daydreaming, apparently there was a police officer with a gun there, and I didn't even notice him. And I got booked for 74 in a 60 zone. Very disappointed, because I try not to speed. Honestly, I try. I do try not to speed. And most of the time I stay on the speed limit, use the cruise control when I'm on a long trip, so that I don't, go at 105 or 110 without even knowing it. I put it on the cruise control, so it's 100 k's an hour. And I'm very disappointed that because of that I don't try not to speed. But I'm extra disappointed that it cost me $235 of my play money. And that is very precious to me, my play money, because I don't get much of it. And when I have to pay $235 for exceeding a speed limit when I didn't want to, it's like a dagger to the heart. Sorry, John, I just beat you up. But they're little mistakes compared to some of the mistakes I've made. Probably back in my mid-30s, so maybe 15 years ago now, I was training really hard. I wanted to do a long-distance marathon race in kayaks. And I was training really hard, too hard. But I didn't take notice of the signs that I was training too hard. And what started to happen was I trained so hard that I started to not be able to slow down and go to sleep. And when I couldn't go to sleep, I started to flip out, like started to hallucinate and not see things properly, not process things properly mentally, and I ended up in hospital. The mistake was that I was so fixated on training hard to be good enough for this race that I actually hurt myself too much. And that was a pretty big mistake, because after that event, I suffered much more acutely with anxiety and depression than I had before that event. And it was a terrible mistake. Terrible mistake. Well, Israel, can you put on the PowerPoint now? Israel, at the time of Daniel, we're going to do Daniel, by the way. We're going to go through Daniel. At the time of Daniel, they had made some big mistakes for a long time. They had basically rejected God's ways, and all the curses that they invoked upon themselves. So Israel, when they took the promised land, they took blessings. And so God said to them, if you follow me and you do my will and you do my word, and I will bless you. You'll be blessed on your way out. You'll be blessed on your way in. Your kneading bowl will be blessed. Your fields will be blessed. Everything will be blessed. You'll have a great time. You'll be blessed. But if you don't listen and you do your own thing, you'll be cursed when you go out. You'll be cursed when you come in. You'll be cursed when you go to make bread. You'll be cursed. Everything will be cursed. Horrible. Absolutely horrible to think that you would be cursed. But that's what they accepted when they accepted the covenant from God. that when they would do the right thing, God would bless them and they would be a blessed people. But when they did the wrong thing and continued to do the wrong thing, curses would come on them. And in Deuteronomy 28, it talks about the curses coming on them to the point where they would eat their own children because God has cursed them so much that they are under siege, and that when they're under siege, they'll have no food, and that they will eat their babies, and anyone who dies, they will eat. So it's a pretty heavy-duty deal that they would not listen to God and do his word. It was horrible. And this is what had happened. They had been besieged by Babylon, and Babylon had surrounded them for a time. They ran out of food, and they had to start eating their children. Horrible, horrible stuff that you would do. But this is what happened. They had no food, so they ate their kids, which is an exact fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28. Well, Daniel was in amongst all of these. Now, this was prophesied even before in Isaiah's time. Like, it fulfilled Deuteronomy 28 when they first took over these curses and blessings, but it fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah's time. And it's very hard to see. But before it even got to the stage where they were besieged by Babylon, it was about 100 years before this that they were warned of this happening. Now, God gave them opportunity. He didn't just go, okay, back in Deuteronomy 28 when your forefathers, you probably can't read it. Can you read it? No, you can just read it. Probably your forefathers, I told them that if they did the wrong thing, I would curse them and the enemies would come against them and they would be besieged. He reminds them many, many years, over 100 years before the event, he reminds them and says to them, you are heading for this. I'm warning you now, you are heading for this. Change course. Change course because you're on the way to having this Deuteronomy 28 curse fulfilled in your lifetime. But they didn't listen. They wouldn't listen to Isaiah. And when it gets time for, and Isaiah ends up going to Hezekiah, who was a good king at the time and had protected Israel, and he says this to him. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of the Lord Almighty. The time will surely come when everything in your palace and all that your predecessors have stored up until this day will be carried off to Babylon. Nothing will be left, says the Lord, and some of your descendants, your own flesh and blood, who will be born to you, will be taken away. And they will become eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So Isaiah has been saying that destruction is coming, and then when Hezekiah invites these Babylonians into his house to have a look around, Isaiah comes to him and says, the time's coming, mate, when this is all going to be taken away. And everything you got here and your children are going to be eunuchs. Terrible, horrible, horrible stuff. But they didn't listen. They kept going the way they were going. In fact, they got worse. It got so bad that God took away their chance. In Jeremiah, through the Jeremiah, it talks about Israel having an opportunity. But by the end of Jeremiah, or getting close to when the sieges start to happen, God says, no, this is happening. This is happening. You are going to have this thing happen. I am going to discipline you harshly for what you have not done. You're turning out like the rest of the countries around you. That's no good. So I'm going to take away your country from you. And Daniel is part of these exiles. So they all get, over time, over a period of years, there's a number of exiles that are taken. So I think there's 3 altogether. So in one of these exiles where the king Nebuchadnezzar defeats the city, he comes in and he takes away some people. And so in one of these, Daniel gets taken away, probably the early one. They take away all the strong people and leave the weaker, poorer people there because they're unlikely to revolt. But over time, that they revolt anyway. The king decides that he's going to try and get out of this, and King of Judah, and Nebuchadnezzar decides to destroy the place in the end, and that happened in 586. So Daniel is one of these guys that goes to Babylon, which is about 1,000 kilometers away. So it's quite a walk with horse or something. I suppose they walked probably in chains all the way. He was thought to be I think he's about 14 years old. 14 to 16 years old, they think Daniel would have been at the time. So he's just a young guy, just a young bloke. So he's taken away from his home. He's probably a reasonably well-to-do guy in Judah, in Bethlehem, in Judah, and in Jerusalem. And when he goes, he's taken away to a foreign land, 1,000 kilometers away, where they don't speak his language, so he has to learn their language. And they take away his name. So he's left all his security, so everything all that secured him as a young bloke, pretty heavy deal for a young guy to be left, take away everything, go to Babylon. He's put in this king's house and chosen to learn the language and the literature. He doesn't know anything about Babylon, or very little. They take away his name, which is an interesting thing. So usually people are named after their god in Israel and also in Babylon, probably a similar thing. So Daniel means God is my judge, and that was his Hebrew name, Daniel. But they changed his name to Belshazzar, which means Bel, guard his life. And Bel was an idol or a god of Babylon. So instead of now being called after God is my judge, Jehovah, he's been called after an idol. And if that's not a slap in the face for an Israelite, I don't know what would be. But that is huge for a young guy to have his name after his own God taken away and be given this name after an idol that he doesn't believe in and doesn't want to believe in and doesn't want to worship. He carries this name that is a worship thing for this God that he doesn't want to worship. And they all had it. So Hananiah, Yahweh has been gracious. Well, he gets his name changed to something else. Mishael, who is what God is. Both have their name changed to represent the god of Marduk, which is a different idol in Babylon. Azariah, Yahweh is my help, was changed to servant of Nabu, which is a Babylon god of wisdom. So you got these guys who have been named after their god, having to give up their name and be called by things that they don't worship and they don't want to worship. Names after a Babylonian god. The last thing, now this is debated, but the last thing that was taken away from them could be their manhood. These guys here could be in some kind of fulfillment of the Isaiah prophecy where they were made eunuchs. So these guys, taken away from their home, 1,000 kilometers away, don't know the language, don't know the customs, don't know anything about the place. They have their names changed to an idol that they don't worship and they don't want to worship. And then probably have been made eunuchs. Horribly, horribly, horrible. Horrible. Then you get this problem where Daniel resolves not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. So he's in this place, he doesn't know, he's had all these things go wrong. And it seems like Daniel is just like, I've had enough, I can't take this anymore. I cannot eat with this king. Some people say, some of the comments on these things are that the food would have defiled him religiously according to Yahweh. But even the debate is that wine was still fine for them to drink. You know, the idea of kosher food, so that's in line with their God. Daniel was able to drink wine and it would have been in line with God. That was fine. That was okay. So they don't understand why he'd reject the food. The other thought is possibly that because the food was offered to idols, that he rejected it because it was offered to an idol. But even vegetables were probably offered to idols as well, so it doesn't make sense that he'd reject the king's food and accept the vegetables when they would have been offered to idols as well. And the last thing is the idea of eating with the king, eating the same food as the king and thereby saying that he is your king. So, I don't know, take your pick. Kind of the idea, I think, is Daniel is like, I can't eat with this guy. He's not my king. I don't want to eat his food. I've got to reject it. So I want to eat something different. I want to separate myself from this regime, this king, all of their stuff. I don't want to eat with them. So he does. He says, no, that's enough. I can't take it anymore. I can't eat with this guy. I can't eat his food. I've got to have something different. And he stands against them. Well, what happens is interesting. It says that God had caused the officials to show favor and compassion on Daniel. And that God gave them knowledge and understanding, all kinds of literature and learning. And Daniel could understand visions, dreams of all kinds. So you've got this thing where Daniel has said, I can't eat with them. And also Daniel has been disciplined by God and brought away with all the exiles and under God's discipline. Yet at the same time he's being disciplined, God is still there with him and giving him favor. I find that interesting, that God just doesn't discipline them and say, oh, well, now cry in the corner. God is disciplining them, but he hasn't left them alone. And when you read Jeremiah, it talks about God saying to them, this is going to happen. You're going to get taken away to Babylon. But anyone who decides to go to Babylon in the exile, I will look after them. But if you stay in the city and you try and protect the city, I'm not going to look after you. Some will go to the sword, some will go to famine, and some will be killed in the fields, and the birds will eat them. God was saying to them, the discipline is you're going to Babylon. You've got to go, and if you go into discipline, I will go with you, and I will bless you there, and I will help you there, and I'll keep you going there. That paints a bit of a different picture of God. He's not like a God who's going to discipline you harshly and leave you in the corner to your own devices and say, suffer it out. It's too bad. I'm not going to come over there with you. He disciplines them, yes, but he stays with them. He stays with them even in the discipline. He's with them always. And he blessed them in the discipline. It's a different picture of a completely angry God that rejects people. You didn't do what I want, so I reject you. To one like a father who would discipline, but then in the middle of it, still be there with them. When Nathan was 2, I think, around the age of 2, he used to get his plate of food and just chuck it on the floor. And you pick it up the first time and you put it all back and throw it on the floor again. And you pick it up and come on, don't do that. That's not right. You can't throw your food on the floor. But he would keep doing it. So anyway, after some time of trying to tell him it's not the right thing to do, we decided okay, if you're going to do that, we'll put you in your cot and you can stay there for a minute and then we'll bring you back as a disciplinary thing. So I pick him up, take him to the cot, sit him in the cot, walk out of the room. Within 20, 30 seconds, he's crying uncontrollably. So I walk back into the room and I comfort him. It's okay, you just got to stay in your cot for a minute and comfort him in his cot so that he takes the discipline, and then after the minute, take him back. And while I'm no reflection of God, that's the kind of thing God is doing. When we get disciplined, he's not running away and leaving us to our own devices. He's there when things get out of control, and He's with us, and He will comfort us, but He will keep us going through the discipline to the end. We've got to complete the discipline. He's always with us, even in the storm that He says we have to go through. So I was reading the other day, God split the waters. He didn't take them over the top of the sea. They had to walk through the waters. And it's a bit the same with discipline. Some disciplines we have to walk through, but we don't walk through it alone. We walk through it with God, and He will keep us going to the end, to the other side. And I think that's an important thing to understand. God does not want us to turn out like the rest of the world, like we were talking about in communion. His discipline always has a redemptive element, an element that is buying back something that could be lost. If we keep up the behavior, that part of us that does that would be lost. But rather than do that, God would rather discipline us, put us through some pain and difficulty like we do with children, but keep us going through that so that we won't be lost. It has a redemptive purpose. God's discipline is redemptive. It's so that we are brought back and can take stuff with us to heaven. And He never leaves us in it. He wants us to be redeemed. All of us. All of us. All of us. Our whole character. So He's continually working on us. And in Daniel, that's what He was doing. Israel were under discipline, but He was trying to redeem them back to a people that listened to Him and did His will and were under His blessings. They wouldn't listen, and it took a great upheaval, a huge problem for them. This mistake that they made of not listening caused them to have this great upheaval, but God was in it with them and got them through it. And they got back to their land in the future after 70 years. God is with us even when He disciplines us. So whatever in communion, if God spoke and you worked out that there is a character flaw or something that you've not dealt with over your lifetime, and you want to invite God into that, He will be with you while you are disciplined through it. There might be pain, there might be some suffering associated with it, but He will be with you so that you will be redeemed and that you will not turn out like the rest of the world. God is with us in whatever storm it brings. Let's pray.